All right, everybody, we're going to start live. My name is Chris Posey. I'm with the Atlanta Urban Debate League, and we're going to talk about getting organized on the negative. I'm going to go ahead and just get started. First, I want to talk a little bit about why organization is important. Organization is an important thing to consider for a number of reasons. One, of course, being in round prep. If you've ever been in a debate round, you know that in round preparation time is a finite and precious commodity. So, the more organized you can be outside of the debate round, the more time you'll have in a debate round to think about arguments as opposed to organizing the arguments that you already have. And, of course, the amount of time that you have outside of a debate round is only constrained by other items in your life, unlike in a debate round where you're constrained by 5 minutes. So having a almost infinite amount of time to prepare for arguments allows you to put an increased amount of thought and consideration into your arguments and utilize resources like coaches, other members of your team, and just discussing things out to make your arguments even better. Another thing to consider is the nonverbal communication aspect of organization. Teams that are extremely organized are perceived as being strong in a debate round, and a judge can see that. And of course, the opposite is true. If you're very disorganized and look very disorganized, then the judge can see that as well. And we all want our judges to vote purely based on the arguments that are made in a debate, but we also can't deny the value that the perception of strength that your team has is very important in a debate round. In almost everyone, the more organized they are, the more clear-minded they can be about thinking, and that's of course important in a debate round when you're using your mind to compete with your opponents. We're going to talk about a few different topics in terms of organization on the negative. We hope to do a lot more in terms of specific detail for getting organized on the negative, and you can find other content about debating on the negative and debating in general on our website at atlantadebate.org. And also, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, Chris at atlantadebate.org, if you have any questions about content in this presentation, or have questions about things that you thought you were going to find and are still looking for answers. Really quickly, before we talk about some of these specific negative organization strategies, I do want to talk about some of the helpful tools that are available to debaters in terms of organization. Um, in terms of technology, there are a lot of different options available, from laptops to tablets to even utilizing phones for certain parts of debates. I've seen more and more. Um, we are not going to discuss how to use tablets or computers to organize your evidence specifically in this video, although a lot of the principles do apply. We'll be talking in particular how to organize evidence on paper. There are a lot of different resources available on how to be better organized when debating digitally, and we hope to create some more as well. You can find some of those on our website at atlantadebate.org. One of the best tools for a long time for debaters using paper has been accordion files and expando files. These accordions act similarly to a file folder, except instead of just having one or two separately, you have up to 30 of, see a lot of accordions that are 30 or 31 pockets of file folders all tied together. The front of the expandos acts well as an index where you can put information regarding the context of the expando, and it really allows you to quickly see and retrieve evidence throughout a debate round. As we talk about some of the specific strategies for getting organized on the negative, I will reference how you can use accordions and expandos to be better organized. Tools, outside of the debate, but certainly inside the debate, can be useful as well, include things like Sharpies or highlighters. These tools can be used to customize evidence either that you haven't read before or haven't had a chance to highlight and find yourself needing in the debate round, or just changing the highlighting depending on experiences reading it before, or other variables like the judge or how the other team is making their arguments. Another thing I'd like to mention that can be helpful in organization is the use of colored paper. A lot of teams will often put things like their 1AC, use different colored paper for flow sheets, and even blocks so that they can quickly, amongst piles of paper that pile up on desks, and even transferring those pieces of evidence to the other team's desks or things that the judges are taking a look at, just having the colored paper can help identify the more vital pieces when you need them, as opposed to staring at a blank canvas of white paper and having to hunt for what you need. Scissors and tape definitely can be of use to further customize your evidence packet and really customize your evidence packet. Maybe there's pages that have multiple pieces of evidence on it and you really only like one of them, or you'd like to cut a piece of evidence off the page and put it on a piece of paper so that you can use the rest of the space to write out your own analyticals or extensions of evidence that you've read in previous speeches, or use colored paper. Scissors and tape allow you to make these customizations, and a lot of debaters see great gains in their organization and effectiveness from it. One of the first particular ways of organization on the negative I'll talk about is utilization of 1NC on-case front lines and how to organize those. So when you go up against an affirmative and you pretty much find out either as early as before you've even debated them, because you know someone that debated them, or you've debated them before, they tell you before the debate round, or even just when the 1AC starts. And so once you know what affirmative the other team is reading, and maybe even some more details in terms of which advantages they like to read and which arguments they like to go for, it's time to start preparing your negative strategy in terms of answering their case. And a lot of negative teams that are successful often break up their answers for the affirmative case into front lines for particular advantages or front lines for solvency. And so, where you end up reading those arguments in the debate can correspond specifically with the advantage, or they can all be read on, a generic case flow or on solvency. But at the same time, dividing them up for choosing the arguments to read can be helpful. So, you have answers to a global warming advantage, you have answers to a economy advantage or impact, and you can pull out the modules that you need depending on the specifics of the affirmative that you're debating. When creating these on-case front lines, it's important to make sure that you're selecting evidence that helps you in the debate, and of course don't want to pick something that could hurt you. An example of something that could hurt you could be reading a piece of evidence that goes against one of the impacts on your off-case positions. And the affirmative could then decide that that advantage is not as useful and use your own arguments against you on other parts of the debate. And then, of course, to help yourself in other parts of the debate, it's important to read defensive arguments against the affirmative's advantage impacts, or on solvency to decrease the likelihood of them being able to solve their impacts. And so that sort of defense can help you with your impact calculus in terms of magnitude, probability, and time frame later in the debate, or in overviews early or in the debate. One other thing, of course, to consider when creating these on-case front lines is case turns. And so if you can either turn the link to one of their advantages, or the reason why they either solve a bad thing that's happening or cause a good thing to happen, and turn it back around and prove why either the plan causes it to happen or prevents it from happening, then that can win you a debate, because the impact to their advantage now goes against them, because instead of either preventing it like they wanted to or causing it like they wanted to, you've read evidence that proves the opposite is true. And so including case turns into your on case front lines can really help ensure that your 1NC strategy is one that can help win you to the debate. One thing to consider when creating these front lines, of course, and this has been talked about in other um, content about organization, flexible size is important. You may debate a team that reads only one advantage and need more answers because you have more time to answer it. You may debate a team that reads a lot more advantages and need to cut down the size of your front lines. In general, if you weigh the essential arguments towards the first one, two, or three arguments on your front line, you can generally learn that if you read your first three arguments, then you're probably good, and everything else after that really just makes it stronger. And so you can adjust accordingly, but you have front lines created ahead of time that can just be read in a way that's helpful depending on the specific circumstances of the debate. Accordions can be just as helpful organizing 1NC on-case front lines as they are organizing other things on the negative or on the affirmative for that matter. Using the first couple slots of an accordion that maybe you have reserved for a particular off-case position or all of your off-case positions, so then it would just be the first couple slots of that section of the accordion. Keep your 1AC there easy and ready and accessible, just for the same reasons, in other conversations where we've talked about why keeping the 1AC handy is important. You want to be able to grab these 1NC for your different positions very quickly, depending on who you're debating. It's not, of course, as important because a lot of times you can select these front lines before the debate round starts, and so if you're limited in the amount of accordions that you have or your time and ability to organize, then keeping case front lines and file folders can be an acceptable alternative. And for affirmatives that you don't debate very often, it may even be a better idea than to waste the effort and space and resources of some of your accordions. Next, I would like to share some thoughts on a strategy for organizing 2NC and 1NR case blocks. The 1NC starts the argument discussion against the affirmative case, but these arguments do you no good if you do not extend them throughout the debate and effectively compare them to other arguments in the debate and the responses that the other team is able to come up with. One of the tools that the negative, of course, has is the negative block. And so having the negative block allows them to provide a little bit more detail in certain parts of the debate and pressure on the 1AR, who has a lot less time to answer some of those arguments. And so if the negative is prepared, it only enhances their ability to do so. An example being, there's cross-examination before the 2NC and not cross-examination before the 1NR. And so if there's an argument that you think would be more beneficial to have a cross-examination on, then the 2NC can use that. And even if it's an argument that the 1NR prepared, then the blocks help the 2NC give that speech almost as effectively as the person who knows that subject a little bit better. Often case it's the opposite. The captain of the negative knows a little bit more about some of the negative arguments and needs to rely on their 1NR to support them, and either due to time constraints or with cross-examination, they need to take one of the arguments that the 1NR typically takes in the negative block, and having the other arguments prepared really allows teammates to work together there when one teammate may be a little bit less prepared for a certain argument. The primary goal, of course, of these case blocks should be to extend the 1NC argument and then defend against the likely attacks that the affirmative comes up with in response. And so, as talked about in some of the affirmative strategy and organization videos, the incentive is not really for the affirmative to spend a ton of time on your negative case arguments. And so you don't want to give away that time back to them by spending too long yourself either inefficiently extending and explaining 1NC arguments, or worse, extending and explaining arguments. And so creating blocks for the negative block, like the 2NC and the 1NR, that have written out extensions of the arguments that you pre-selected for the 1NC can really help increase the efficiency and effectiveness at which you deliver an extension of your 1NC evidence. Same, of course, goes for defense. So if you're going up against a global warming advantage and you are reading a piece of evidence that says that global warming will take 1 million years, I'm just making something up, and the other team answers that, there's responses that you can predict, and so having those responses pre-written on your blocks can increase your ability to answer those arguments effectively. But besides responding to the affirmative, utilizing the negative block to put more evidence on parts of the debate than the affirmative has time to can be really helpful. And so, to go back to the previous example, maybe you have a couple more pieces of evidence that back up the time frame at which global warming will cause its impacts. And so having those extra backup pieces of evidence available to you, and pre-selected and thought about and maybe even discussed with teammates of the team can be really helpful. As mentioned in other parts of the organization discussion, flexible size is also important. You don't want to have too little or always read too much in response to the affirmative arguments. And so just organizing the blocks in kind of a top-down fashion where your most important arguments are first, and knowing when you can start and stop within your blocks depending on the constraints of the debate is helpful. Accordions are even more helpful for organizing some of these case blocks at the same time, as mentioned when talking about organizing the 1NCs in the accordions for case debate. It is very, very possible just to organize your front lines and your blocks, maybe create a secondary index for your front line, your 1NC front lines and blocks, and just stick them in the file folder or where you put the rest of the case negative. Moving along to discussion of getting organized for off-case negative positions, the 1NC is an important part of that. You typically know what you want to read in the 1NC for your generic and even specific off-case arguments. And so having the 1NCs pre-selected and placed in an easy to access and grab spot in an accordion or file folder is really, really important. And so, if, for instance, you're reading a spending disadvantage, you want to, before a debate tournament starts, make sure that you have pre-selected your best piece of uniqueness evidence, link evidence, and impact evidence, and set it aside for use during the debate tournament. And if you're a little bit less experienced debater, all of that work of picking the 1NC shell has been done for you. You just grab the corresponding pages on the index in your packet. However, the organization isn't done for you, and so you can certainly pull those pages out and put those in an accordion and have them available to you quickly. Flexible size is also important for 1NC off-case shells. Sometimes you might debate teams that read more advantages than others, and you have less time to read off-case positions. And if you can't sacrifice a particular position as a whole, you might want to have like I've seen a lot of debaters have a short version of their 1NC shell for their different arguments. It's always easier to kind of add in arguments if you need to make it longer. You can grab some of the evidence that you normally read in the 2NC, but to make it shorter can be a little bit more problematic to figure out in the round. So having a short version of your 1NC can be helpful too. Always make sure, as mentioned a little bit before, as you update your evidence or updates are released for your evidence throughout the year, that you're incorporating those updates into your 1NC shells. You don't want to be reading a piece of evidence that's much, much older and your opponent has already incorporated the updates into their responses, and you just end up being behind already in the negative block and have to read the updates when you could have read that updated piece of evidence in the 1NC and probably didn't even end up needing the 1NC uniqueness evidence from the beginning of the year before it was updated. Another thing to consider for 1NC organization is some of the more experienced debaters may go into debate rounds and read different link scenarios, maybe depending on different affirmatives or different advantages or just preference based on the strategy for that particular debate. And so you can separate the different link modules out, so maybe keep or even impact modules in separate pockets of an accordion file. And so an example might be that you're reading a relations disadvantage. It's a United States-China relations disadvantage. And depending on the affirmative you debate, maybe one has an interaction with Russia, one has an interaction with Australia, and you have specific links depending on that. You can keep those separately and just combine them with the uniqueness and the impact that you've selected. Once you get to the organization of the negative block arguments for off-case position, so responding to affirmative responses and extending 1NC arguments off case in the 2NC and the 1NR. That's of course the first responsibility of the negative block is to extend the 1NC evidence. And so, creating 2NC extensions for your arguments can be really, really helpful. An example might be on a disadvantage. You have a 2NC uniqueness block, and at the top of that 2NC uniqueness block is a quick extension with a summary of the tag, maybe even an additional warrant and the site and the year of that evidence. That's very quick and does that. And then underneath that piece of evidence, you can either put 1, 2, or 3, or whatever, just in order your preferred uniqueness extension evidence. And if you don't need to read some of the evidence as a particular response to the affirmative 2AC, just reading it in that part of the debate can help keep things organized and just increase the overall strength that you have on the uniqueness debate. When you are responding to and organizing responses to the affirmative 2AC, when you are responding, you're doing it off the 2ACs line by line, typically on your off case. So, a lot of times the 2AC line by line corresponds to the 1NC line by line. They make their uniqueness responses first, they make their link responses second, they'll make their impact arguments after that, etc. Or, they will hopefully group their uniqueness arguments together, group their link arguments together, group their impact arguments together. In general, the judge is going to flow the 2AC responses straight down, and so you want to stay along with the judge. And so you want to answer the 2AC line by line. And so, if they're going in order, that's great. You read your 2NC uniqueness block, you read your 2NC link block, you read your 2NC impact block. But if they do jump around a little bit in order, then you can move those blocks around in the order in which you read them. Just like the mantra for other discussions on organization and preparation for debate, you want to use a similar strategy here of trying to avoid being unprepared more than once on a particular argument. If you debate an argument, develop a system for at least writing that argument down if you weren't prepared for it, and then coming up with a way to craft responses to it. Maybe you come up with some quickly and write it down on a piece of paper and put it away. Maybe you talk with your coach or your partner real quick. Maybe you don't get to it until before the next tournament, but the goal is to have a reliable system to continue to be prepared as possible for these responses. As mentioned above, having 2NC link and impact modules can be really helpful. You may want to, just like affirmatives read add-on advantages in the 2AC or even the 1AR, it's very likely that you will want to read new link scenarios or new impact scenarios to increase the importance of a particular off-case position in the negative block. So having those modules pre-created, maybe a 1 to 2 card impact module or a 1 to 2 card link module that can be read and is easily labeled at the top so that you can grab your preferred 2NC link and impact stories and read those in the debate. The rest of the extensions that you use typically beyond your 2NC blocks on an off-case position and of course beyond your 1NC arguments, you can certainly keep them in an accordion or you can put them away in a folder. Just make sure that you keep your indexes and that you, just in case you need them, and you can use those indexes even to help organize on the front of a file folder or on the front of an accordion. Still make sure you take the time to read through all of your evidence, and as you continue to get organized and prepared, you're going to eventually less and less need to grab other evidence other than the evidence that's in your blocks. And so, um, remove evidence from blocks. If you don't need it, move evidence back in. Your off-case extensions should be things that you go to less and less as you become more organized. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And of course, if you have any other specific questions regarding this topic or anything regarding debate, we're always here to help. AtlantaDebate.org is online 24/7 with plenty of resources for people eager to learn more about debate and how to become better debaters. You can also reach out to me directly, Chris@AtlantaDebate.org, our YouTube channel at Atlanta Debate, and of course, as we're live now on Twitch at Atlanta Debate. Thanks again. Appreciate your attention and look forward to seeing you all at the tournaments.